Hello and welcome everyone to the workshop where we'll be exploring some of the practical ways to help you manage a hybrid team. My name's Dilpazir and I'm a curator and tech lead at the Oxford Group. And having spent the last decade leading teams to create digital learning, I've got a particular interest and expertise in virtual and digital design. And as an executive coach, I'm also experiencing through my clients the impact that hybrid working is having on people's psyche and relationships. My co-host today is the one and only Andy Dent. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dilpazir. I'm not too sure about the one and only, but I am one of the principal consultants here at the Oxford Group. And my role is working with clients to build programs to help managers and leaders to thrive. And unsurprisingly, managing hybrid teams is a real hot topic of discussion right now. And actually, it's something I'm really passionate about as well. I've been managing remote or hybrid teams for around 10 years now. But as we've all experienced through the pandemic, things have shifted. Things have been shaken up and they continue to be shaken up. And we've got this new mode of what we're calling hybrid working with some really unique challenges, but also some great opportunities. And that's what we're going to be exploring today. So just firstly, the content from today's session is taken from a practical guide to managing hybrid teams. Our real aim when we started out to put this guide together was not to build a definitive guide to managing hybrid teams, but to build a practical guide, because there's so much noise out there, there's so many theories. What we want to do is cut beyond that and build something that was really useful for managers as a pragmatic tool on things that they could do that are relatively simple and straightforward to set up or to think about, but that have a real difference for people in this hybrid reality that we find ourselves in now. And just before we dive into the content, a little bit about us at the Oxford Group. So the Oxford Group's been around for about 35 years now, coming up 35 years next year. And our work is all about helping global organizations to help their leaders and managers to thrive through either our management or leadership development programs or executive coaching programs as well. So I'll hand over to Dilpazir.
Thank you so much, Andy. Okay, so let's get right to it, shall we? I want you to look at the screen and tell me which challenges and concerns you have on your mind at the minute. Michelle, if you'd kindly launch today's first poll. For the rest of us, I want you to choose your top 3 questions that reflect what you're finding most concerning. And as you're doing that, let me tell you a little bit of background behind these questions. They're from an anthropologist called Gillian Tett, who wrote a book this year about anthrovision. And this is the notion that for years, we've been told by anthropologists that it's often those informal and unplanned interactions and rituals that matter most in any work environment. So what happens when you take those interactions out? What becomes missing if you give them up? So these are some of the questions that we extracted from his new piece of work to reflect some of the concerns that you might have on your mind. I know, Andy, from my perspective, it's those small moments of just being able to double check whether your thinking's right. When you're working on a project, just sense checking with people in your team to make sure you're in the right space rather than when you're running a bit of a bubble at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just hearing what's going on. I went into the office for the first time in quite some time 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing what I picked up from just the conversations that were going on around me. And I realized actually that is what you do miss in a hybrid world. You just don't get that. You get the understanding from those people who may have a meeting with that day, but not the wider view of what else is going on in the organization sometimes.
Absolutely. Quite often in a meeting, you hear the loud voices rather than everybody's voices. And some people always like to have a bit of a chat afterwards, don't they, when they've had a bit of a think about it. Michelle, how are we doing?
Yeah.
How are we doing with the questions? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we've got a bit of a top 2, I think. How do you build and maintain trust in your team? And how do you manage performance remotely? Probably some equal second and thirds. How do you bring new people on board? How do you create the right company atmosphere? I'm glad you selected some of those. There are some of the topics we're going to explore a little bit in detail in today's webinar. But you've also got all of that information in the free guide that you can download today. So brilliant. Let's keep going in that space then. Thanks for sharing those concerns. Now let's explore what's going on for you in terms of fears and opportunities. So we know there's some fears, and we also know that hybrid working presents a lot of opportunities for us. So what are you hoping as hybrid working continues to embed as a way of working? So I'd love if you could type some of your hopes of hybrid working in the chat box. I know flexible working and continuing that was something that's a bit of a common theme for people in terms of hybrid working. What are you finding is some of your hopes? I remember Gemma, more flexibility. That's right. I think a lot of people have really appreciated the trust being given to them by being in charge of their own time and being able to navigate their day. Josh, thanks. Greater talent pool, greater engagement in workforce. Absolutely. Suddenly the world's become a village. Literally, people are connectable. You can talk to everyone. Jenny, more productivity because people are working at their own pace. It's interesting you say that, isn't it? Because when you're in control of your time and you know somebody's not just going to interrupt you every 2 minutes, you can kind of get down to something. Somebody gave me a piece of advice about completing a cycle, giving yourself permission to complete a cycle. Some great ones, Matthew. Maintenance of pre-pandemic culture. Maggie, that people continue to benefit from the flexibility it offers. Flexibility is a thing. Jill, fear, people losing flexibility, only wanting to be on their normal days and not open to changing, booking holidays on days they're due to be in the office, some more working from home than being in. Okay, so yeah, that is a real challenge, isn't it? How do people navigate some of their emotional states? Well, great, thanks for sharing those. Please continue to chat. Andy's going to be monitoring the chat as we walk through the rest of the presentation. So what's today's webinar about? Hybrid working is probably not so new anymore. We've been doing this for many months now in our current context. And for some organizations, we've been doing this for a long time, although it's probably only for a small segmentation of the workforce. I'd also say it's not the norm either. So whilst it's becoming less new, it's definitely not the norm. So the white paper we've written has been done so to be a really clear direction, to be practical and applicable in your real world scenarios, to support managers like yourself and myself to manage those hybrid teams. If you go to the next slide, mate. So I appreciate you've got lots of advice being thrown your way right now. Even as we were preparing this webinar, probably every couple of days, there was a bit of a newsletter or an invitation about hybrid working. So to help, we're sharing our insights and knowledge in a way to be a bit memorable and useful. So drum roll, welcome the hybrid houseboat metaphor. The houseboat will help you adopt a powerful mindset that helps you encompass the key variables. So I want you to see yourself as a captain of this ship as you navigate through the next 12 months. So if you think about kind of the different aspects of this boat, you'll notice, for example, we've got creating a strong base of trust, which is the hull of your boat. You know, if you've got a trusting team, you've got a trusting place to work, you're going to bring the whole of yourself to that work. And that trust is then encompassed by the nurturing inclusiveness, which are your safety rails in your houseboat. And then also we've got onboarding new starters. So your new people that join the team do so in an inclusive and trusting workspace. And then in that space, you, as a captain of your ship, you go to a vantage point and you articulate your vision. So people are really clear about where they're heading as a team and what that means for them in their particular job role. And then they learn on the job. You know, how do you do that when 70% of your job was about learning with people around you? How do you do that in a hybrid workspace? So even at the Oxford Group, we've got new starters. How are those people experiencing learning stuff when they can't just tap people on the shoulder? And then we've got navigating your change. So we know that there's always going to, your hybrid houseboat is going to be living in water, and water never is still, or is rarely still. So how do you navigate the constant change, sometimes more, sometimes less? And finally, we've got 8, establishing the right team culture. So the right atmosphere, the right climate in which you function. So you'll know it's not what you do at work, but what it's like being at work. That culture, that atmosphere is really key. So these are the 3 aspects. But what we're going to do today is explore specifically 3 of them. Number 1, nurturing inclusiveness. Number 2, articulating your vision. And 3, managing performance remotely. And there were some of your top three concerns, which is really nice to hear. But before we do that, we'd like to establish the primacy of trust, which Andy will explore.
Thanks, Dilpazir. So we know and feel that trust is a really big concern for managers in this hybrid world. And one of those prominent questions that crops up quite often is, how can I trust that my people are doing what they're meant to be doing? How do I know they're not just watching Netflix, for example? We know that trust is really foundational, and it is the hull of the boat. It's what keeps us afloat and what moves us forwards as a collective and individuals. And it's something that we need to nurture constantly on an ongoing basis and refresh. We all know this. If we don't nurture trust, we can start to see cracks. And that's where we're at risk of our relationships starting to sink. So we often think of trust as something that we either have or we haven't. It's either there or it isn't. And while we do appreciate trust in some cases can take time to build, there are some really specific characteristics that build or take away from trust. And we know from the trust equation that you'll see here on the slide that the things that build trust are credibility, reliability, and intimacy, or a feeling of closeness or security around people. But the other thing that we know that's really important to take into account is probably more powerful than the three things that make trust is what takes away from trust. And that is if people appear to be self-orientated, they're only in it for themselves. That can absolutely destroy trust, no matter how good your credibility, reliability, or intimacy is. So how do you go about achieving the right levels of orientation towards others and away from ourselves, especially in such a busy time that we all work in, such fast-paced working environments and widespread job roles that we're all trying to achieve in limited time? So I guess for us, it's all about the engagements with people and how we can have them in a positive and an engaging way that makes people feel like we're in it for them. We're in it to listen, we're in it to share, we're in it to care. A telltale sign, actually, if that you can use as a bit of an acid test for how much you trust others, is when the Teams ring goes off, which fills a lot of us with dread nowadays, or your mobile phone goes, and you see the name of whoever it is that's trying to get hold of you pop up. Is your reaction, oh no, not them again, what do they want? If you're having that type of reaction, that's probably because you're sensing a self-orientation in that individual, and that really hampers our trust and our motivation to really work with that person. So we're going to be sharing a few practical ways for you to dial up your other orientation so that it's much more about other than it is about us. So our first area that we're focused on in our hybrid houseboat is trust. As we shared, the hull of the boat, the foundation of everything. And the first thing is about maximizing the micro transactions. We touched on it just at the start, actually, as a few of you dialed in, those small windows of opportunity to engage with people that's not about the task in hand. So it's maybe about personal things, getting to know people, understanding, asking questions to understand, just finding out what people have done at the weekend, the stuff that kind of really matters outside of work that allows you to build a deeper understanding of someone. So these are really more important than ever for connecting on a human level. The only problem is there's less of them that naturally occur, because if we're not physically in the office as much as we were, those physical touch points, those water cooler moments just aren't, they're just not there. So how do we think? We've got to now think about creating space for these micro transactions. Now, whether that's formally or informally, it's just really helpful to start challenging ourselves and thinking about how many micro transactions have I created today with my team, with my people, with my colleagues. I'm sure lots of you have got some really good ideas about this, so I'd be really interested if you could pop anything in chat, any of your ideas, because I'm sure others would benefit from it. But a couple of thoughts: dropping meetings from an hour to 45 minutes. I've never shortened a meeting from 60 minutes to 45 minutes and not achieved what we needed to from that meeting. we just become a bit more focused. And that other 15 minutes we can use at the start of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, just to connect, just to find out what's going on, to ease ourselves into the space and just kind of find out what's going on for one another. The other thing that is, and some of you may already do this, but we advocate for creating specific agenda-free spaces. And I know that might sound painful because we're so focused on achieving outcomes that an agenda-free space may feel a bit counterintuitive, but it can be really, really powerful. We use it as a team, the team that Dilpazir and I are in. On Friday, we have a scrum every Friday morning. We get together and it's a time to connect, and we share a 2-minute overview of what's been going on for us that week, what we've got planned for the next week. But more often than not, that actually just turns into a space just to connect, talking about what people are doing at the weekend, getting updates on the kids, the cats, the dogs, the running activity, coffee shops that people have been to that week. And even one of our colleagues, Jan, shared some adventures that her grandson has just had on his newfound love for tractors, which was much more interesting than some of the agenda-led spaces we have. So we feel that those microtransactions really, really have a power and are more important now than ever before. The next one is about listening and sensing, and actually giving our people the crown. So trying to spot and create the opportunities for our people to share their challenges and blockages so that we can help to fix them. Because we're not physically together all the time, these small things, they can build to create bigger tensions or roadblocks further down the road. So it's really important for us to listen and proactively surface issues by dialing in and listening to our people. Now, I always find with listening, it's so hard, isn't it? Where again, we're in this fast-paced world, just to switch off. It's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes I catch myself closing my mouth, but not disengaging my brain, my inner voice. And that's something that, you know, we really need to work on nowadays, is to just calm that inner voice, just take that time to truly listen and connect. One of the biggest worries I'm sure many of you have got as well as a manager for me is in teams where I've managed that have started to go quiet. You know, that's a telltale sign that they think that I'm not listening, that maybe I don't care. I won't do anything about what they're bringing up, or even worse, they've completely checked out. So that's a good telltale sign. It is, you know, are your people bringing you issues? They're bringing you issues. It might not feel like it at the time, but that's a good problem to have. You know, as managers, we're the ears of the organization. You know, we carry what's happening on the ground all the way through the key stakeholders, so we can kind of make sure that people know what the feel is going on within the organization. And if we can really tune in and listen, we're going to help our people, we're going to help our teams, and we're going to help our organizations to thrive. And lastly, emphasizing, so putting ourselves in the shoes of our people may sound really simple, but just seeing things through their lens and consciously taking the time to do that. This builds that really important intimacy, that security in the trust equation that we know that's really important. And I suppose the key thing with all of these points is by doing them regularly and proactively, we stand a really good chance of nurturing a relationship that's orientated towards others, towards our people, rather than towards us. And that intent really shows up for people, and that's what builds trust ultimately. So that's a little bit about trust. That kind of sets the scene for the basis, the foundations for us to build upon. And the next thing we're going to look at is nurturing inclusiveness. And we see this as creating the safety rails around the boat, making sure that everybody's got that safe space to operate and to be themselves, create that all-important psychological safety and the conditions for success that we're going to allow our people, either as individuals or as a collective team, to really deliver. So it's all about creating an inclusive environment. Now, I'm going to throw a question out there. I'm a bit nervous about this one, but let's see what comes out. I'm interested to hear about times where you've maybe been excluded and how that's made you feel. So let's see what comes through. I'm going to let that build in the chat, and I'll come back to it once I've shared a few points. But think of a time where you've maybe been excluded for whatever reason, let's see what comes out. How did it make you feel is the most important thing. So the first point we're going to start looking at is recruiting or bringing people into our teams or projects. Ensuring we've got a diverse team brings real value and perspective. And I think we've already touched on it, but one of the key opportunities of this more hybrid or even remote working practices that we're able to experience right now is that wider talent pool. So not just having to rely on the population in the vicinity of our physical offices is really opening up more opportunity to cast the net wider and to bring in more diversity into our teams. And we consciously want to be recruiting for new perspectives. And that could be in many different ways. It could be age, ethnicity, gender, cultural diversity, neurodiversity, or any type of diversity, really. The key thing is that we want to bring in fresh thinking, new perspectives, different ways of looking at the same problems that we've maybe been banging our head against the brick wall as the current team. An example here at the Oxford Group, we had a couple of colleagues that joined us recently. One's from Greece and one's from Croatia. And they've been like a breath of fresh air in many respects, as well as all of the other colleagues that we've brought in, but particularly Georgia and Branko have come in, but not only because they're new to the organisation, they're seeing things with fresh eyes. They've also brought in entirely different lenses, a different set of cultural experiences that is already causing us to think differently, and they're challenging the norm, which has been really, really enlightening for many of us. Now, diversity alone is only part of the answer. And for us to really harness the power and creativity of the innovation that diversity can enable, we've got to make sure that we foster that culture of inclusion. And central to this is building psychological safety, a bit of a buzzword, which I'm sure we've all heard thrown around in recent times. So to ensure that our teams can be productive, we've got to make sure that this notion of psychological safety is in place. So that's the sense that our people feel that they can bring their authentic self to share their views or their ideas or their feelings without the fear that in some way could harm them. It could be detrimental to their reputation, their status, or their future opportunities. We know that trust is a key component in this kind of hull and foundation of the hybrid houseboat. But what else can we do to help build psychological safety? I was thinking about this because psychological safety is quite a deep one and we could spend hours on this, but I've literally got about 2 minutes. So how do you decipher hours into 2 minutes? And for me, I think psychological safety is about embracing difference. It's about being curious. And if we can do that and lean into difference without trying to shut it down or talk over it, then that makes a big, big difference for our teams and for our people. We're going to share a couple of reference points actually to a piece of McKinsey research around diversity, winning in diversity space and how inclusion matters. And also to some of the work of Amy Edmondson around psychological safety and create psychological safety in teams. So if you're interested in this area and you want to dig a bit deeper, you're more than welcome to do so. And lastly, and fundamental to this concept of inclusion, is making every effort, and I underline every effort, to ensure that everybody is included. And we don't always get this right. We're human, we're not perfect, but it's about making the effort to make sure that we give everybody the opportunity to be included and to have a level playing field. So we talk in the guide about a digital first approach or a virtual first approach. And we reference this kind of world at the moment where you've maybe got a team meeting. You might have 2 or 3 people in the office and then 3 or 4 people dialing individually from their own home offices. What's the right way to go about that? You know, do you have the 3 or 4 people together in a room and then 3 people separately or 4 people separately? Or do we get them all on the same platform where everybody's experience is going to be equal? And our thought is actually creating the same experience for everybody, creating the same access, the same conversation at the same time is probably the best way to go. There'll be lots of opinion around that, but we definitely think that that's the way forward. Other things in terms of making sure people are included is if we're arranging a face-to-face, catch up, which might not be as often as it has been before, planning meeting or just a team to get together, let's do it in a way that everybody can get to it. So those people that have got children, can they access it? People that are traveling from further distance, let's be mindful of that. And I'm sure we're all doing that anyway. This isn't a new problem, but certainly something where there's a bit more tension around it now, where people have had more freedom. Suddenly when we ask them to come together to a place at a certain time, and they've got to go away from the comfort of the home office, if that's what they've been used to for the last year and a half, that can bring out some threat reaction. So let's make sure that we limit that threat wherever we can. Also, celebratory events, for a good quarter or performance of the team, making sure that we do that in an inclusive way. So we're not excluding anyone with small children that can't get out in the evening, or maybe people from other cultures where being in the presence of alcohol is forbidden. Let's do things where everybody can be included. There's lots of other examples we could use. And as I say earlier, we're not always going to get this right, but for me, it's about intention. People feel that intention. They know you're trying, and that's the most important point there. So I'm just going to pause there because I've spoken for a while, and Dilpazir, you've been keeping a keen eye on chat. So what's been coming through?
Some really honest and authentic responses to your question about, how might people feel when they've been excluded from teams. So Matthew said upset and frustrated. Maria, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. I felt that I wasn't good enough. Huda said disappointed, upset. Gretel said frustrated. So kind of a real sense of and negative emotions, feeling disconnect from the team. Jenny said, as if nobody understood what I might have to offer, feeling quite small, which is really powerful, image, like he's completely disempowered. Maggie said lesser, not worthy. Gemma said frustrated, my opinion not valued.
Some interesting stuff there. Thank you everyone for sharing. And what that brings out for me is the fact that we know from the research about speaking truth to power that people often don't share this stuff, that actually all of those emotions and feelings get bottled up behind the scenes and cause that frustration. So it just really hammers home the importance of that foundation of trust and getting those safety rails around the boat, so that people feel included, and they don't have that level of threat potentially or emotion that comes out.
Completely.
Okay, I'll hand over to you, Dilpazir, my friend.
So thank you so much, Andy. And I really like that metaphor about bottling up, because if you don't articulate it, it stays with you, right? And then it troubles the conversation thereafter. So what we've looked at so far is the base of trust, which is the hull of your boat, and having an inclusive workspace, which are your guardrails. What I want to focus on now is articulating your vision. So this is your big picture statement. You might have one for your organization already. You might even have one for your team. And I know sometimes the vision statement seems like a bit of a tick box exercise. But as a manager of a hybrid team, as a manager of a team, you've got two challenges in this space. One, your team will be looking to you to articulate the vision. Number two, your team is busy, just like you, in all the small urgent tasks. Now, some of those urgent tasks are not important. You know it, I know it, and some of them are important. Either way, they're busy in the details. So you, as captain of your boat, are expected to articulate a vision. Otherwise, the question is, where is your boat heading? So what we see in the next slide is that the first key principle is to be clear. In truth, no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. There might be another variant, a completely new virus, God forbid, massive climate change, power firms are going bust. If today you pretend to play hero, the know-it-all, tomorrow invariably you'll be unmasked for sure. So being honest about not knowing will just make you authentic. It will not make you weak, as long as you help navigate. So as long as you still set a clear vision and then help your team break down what that vision means for them in terms of their next phase of work into manageable chunks, then you're going to be really clear for them in terms of articulating that vision. And every person in your team, if you like your litmus test, should be clear on the big picture and also clear on what that means for them this month or this quarter. The next thing is to be together. So say, for example, you bring everyone together and you say to people, our vision is to double our footprint in the next 5 years. That's our vision. Now, some people in your team are going to translate that vision in this way. Does that mean I have to work twice as hard? And others will be interested in what markets you're exploring. So, oh, we're going to be doubling our footprint. So where are we going to go in a business that we haven't gone before? So the head's going to kind of start firing in all directions, some directions that you're not thinking of as a manager when sharing that vision at all. And another group of people, and my sense of it is they're going to be the majority of the people, are just going to find the conversation a little bit disengaging or won't articulate their opinion. And by being together, what you're able to do is kind of leverage those different personality types. So those people who are going to be worrying about doubling their work over the next 5 years might articulate those concerns and will give you a chance to bring clarity to what the vision means and what it doesn't mean for everybody in the room. And then for those people who might start talking about which markets they're going into, they're going to bring a sense of excitement to your vision. And that's really nice because it's not just you sharing a powerful vision. What you're creating is a bit of an atmosphere that people can lean into and they can explore together. And finally, be well informed. So your vision is not going to be a detailed plan. If it is, it's most likely it's not a vision. The opposite danger is that it feels like there's no connection between my day job and what the company is trying to do. So you're busy in the next task, or the next meeting, the next deadline, and you can't see the kind of the golden thread between what you're doing and what the company's vision is. So imagine this in a boat situation, right? In your mind, as the captain of your ship, you're heading towards a particular landmass and your crew don't even know that. So how are they going to help you get there? So in a hybrid context where people can end up in a little bit of an individual bubble quite easily working at home, you've got to make sure that there's a connection between today and 2025 or whenever your vision projects forward to. So some of you might be familiar with the acronym VUCA. And VUCA was a term given by the American Army to articulate just some of the changing nature of warfare. And it's been applied to business for many years now to articulate just how difficult it is to make sense of all the change. So VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I just want to focus on the first one, volatile. That's articulating this idea that, you know, literally every week or every day, sometimes twice in a day, there's some announcement or some shift in the marketplace. And you think, so what does this mean for us then? What should we do differently? And what you can do as captain of your ship is provide vision, which is the alternative opposite, if you like, from volatility. You kind of shift people to a higher ground and say, what are you noticing in terms of patterns? What are you noticing in terms of speed of change? And see if you can see something that you can navigate with a vision that helps you not get too bogged down by the detail. So your vision plays a really anchoring, clarifying role when you articulate that in the context of volatility. How's that landing for people? Like your reflections and your thoughts in that? Anybody, how's the VUCA world playing out in your workspace? How are people responding to all of the constant change? I mean, how's that making you feel as a manager trying to help a team go through there? Andy, how have you noticed the way we're navigating change at the Oxford Group?
So I think we're making a real effort to connect to the vision.
Yeah.
I think a lot of organizations are revisiting purpose.
Yeah.
And bringing out the link to purpose. I think purpose has been a much more fundamental driver. It's come to the forefront of a lot of people's minds throughout the pandemic. You know, why do I do what I do? How do I connect to the organization? So I think we've been doing a lot of that in recent times. And I think that's helpful because it does anchor you back. I think sometimes what I see in organizations is there is the 2025 vision or whatever. 2025 seems to be a popular year. Everybody's shooting for that at the moment. But then there's this gap in the middle of how managers are connecting others to that vision. So that's probably what I would say we're seeing.
And I really like the why question, right? You ask the why am I here? Why am I doing this job? And a vision can really plug into some of those values, especially with the conversation going on about kind of the great resignation. If you can plug people into the why, it gives them a lot of intrinsic motivation to get through any difficulties that they might be doing so.
Yeah. Maggie's just shared on chat. It's good to bring out, sorry, just a couple more coming through. It's good to bring out into the open the challenges that people are experiencing and realizing the vision in their part of the business.
Yeah.
Great point there for Maggie, for sure. And then Jenny's just adding, we're definitely making an effort to connect on purpose, but also breaking large visions and targets into smaller chunks. Absolutely, as you shared. I think that's a really important thing, because we don't know what's coming next. So getting it down to the smallest possible thing we can do to make a difference in the short term is a really good direction to have.
Completely. And if I could kind of get every manager to do that, what you're doing, Jenny, I think we go a long way to help people feel engaged, and they know how they fit into the big picture. Okay, brilliant. So let's move on to the next section, which is about managing performance remotely. So in fairness, it's always been hard to manage teams. And now that you can't see them, it's a little bit more complicated. It's added to the complexity. So one story a manager was sharing with me just a few days ago was their sense of frustration of not knowing if people are really getting their work done, or if they would be a little bit more willing to come in and network with colleagues. So that reticence and that disconnect was a real source of frustration. And we know that's a real and fair and valid question. And what we're saying is that don't make negativity your starting point, though, because what it's going to do is set you on an unnecessarily negative course. So to help you set your team on the right course, we're recommending 3 strategies. First, approach 1 is recognition. So we know that 63% of employees feel like they don't get enough praise. So according to the book, How Full Is Your Bucket? The number 1 reason people leave their jobs is that they just don't feel appreciated. So not getting recognition for your work when you know you deserve it, you know you've done a good job, you know you've done that little bit of extra, and you don't get the recognition can be one of the most frustrating things that can happen in your organization. So recognizing your employees, your team members is one of the key things you can do to increase retention and lower turnover. In fact, I found in a recent report by Deloitte, they said that, and I quote, organizations with recognition programs, which are highly effective at enabling employee engagement, had 31% lower voluntary turnover than organizations that didn't. Now, just let me kind of place that into figure, reflect on that. So you know how hard it is when you're out there recruiting for a new position to find the right people to apply for them. You go through the application process, you bring them on board. They might even be really motivated, but they're not skilled up to your organization, don't really know the background yet. And then all those weeks and months and efforts it takes to bring them on board, to get them the right skill set, they're motivated. To lose someone like that has a massive impact, has an impact on you, the team, the people that have to shoulder their responsibilities as you recruit again. Simply by offering more recognition, being positive more often, you could reduce that by 1/3, which is a massive thing. And think of all the time, what you would do instead. Approach number 2 is to ask, listen, and hear. So what we're talking about here is, think of a person as, if you've read the chimp paradox, it's their chimp. If you read our 5 conversations book, it's your amygdala. You might know it as your survival instinct. Essentially, this is that emotional reaction when somebody's trying to raise a difficult conversation with us, and it makes us completely deaf almost to what's being said. We're so busy protecting and defending ourselves, even in our own minds, before we've articulated anything, that we're not really listening to what's going on. So what happens then is that when we make a mistake as a team member, and as a manager, you might be talking to me as an individual, what I'm doing in my mind is ascribing most of the responsibility to the circumstances rather than myself. So for example, if somebody comes late for work one day, they'll articulate that as, the bus was late, and so I'm late. It's the circumstances which caused my behavior. And other people might look at that very same person walking through the door 15 or 20 minutes late, and they'll say that person is a little bit disorganized. that person was probably a little bit lazy, maybe they had a bit of a late night. So automatically we assign it to an individual's character. So by listening in that difficult conversation moment, what you're allowing to happen is for people to feel heard. And we know we live in an increasingly polarized world, right? There's left and right wing politics when it comes to climate, comes to family situations. In all of these things, those polarized views are making it more and more important that we listen more so that people feel heard more, so that they in turn will listen more. It's a virtuous cycle. And approach number 3 is this notion of start and stay with the facts. So I'm a remote employee. And I'm permanently home-based worker anyway. I was before COVID. Yeah, I speak to my manager two to three times a week as standard. And what that's allowing my manager to do is have all of these first-hand experiences of how I'm performing on a good day, on a Monday, or when I'm tired on a Friday, or when I've had an exhilarating call midweek. That person is being able to see kind of me in all of my guises. And Andy, you referred to this Scrum meeting we have on a Friday. It's just another way in which we're connecting with each other and getting to have that first-hand moment. Now, what that does in a hybrid context is, it used to happen quite naturally before, I think. Now, post-COVID is something that we're proactively advising you to create those spaces in which then, when you're having a difficult conversation, the fog of not knowing suddenly starts to disappear because you've had multiple first-hand experiences of these situations. So that's our third strategy: start and stay with the facts, which you've been able to collate through first-hand experiences. So there's always these silent moments of pause, reflect, and question. But yeah, really like kind of your thinking on how that's landing for you. Can you think of a situation when you've been sat down and somebody's having a conversation you haven't felt heard? Because that's always a difficult moment, isn't it?
I think it'll also be interesting to hear from people in terms of any challenges they've had managing teams remotely, managing performance remotely, because we know there's some real challenges there, and there's some anxiety about how do you go about doing that? How do you really manage performance when we have a perception we can't see it because it's not in an office, but actually, we can very often see the input or the output, sorry, of performance. So I'd be interested to hear that as well.
Okay.
So who does share?
Yeah, sorry.
Easy to listen.
Well, it's this busyness, isn't it? Everybody feel like they're being tugged in all directions, and we as managers are no different to that. And then I think that's something, again, people can fairly say, if we're not listening because we're feeling too busy to listen, makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, for sure. So I've got another one coming here from Maggie. As middle managers, we can feel squashed. Yeah, the old squeezed middle. Engaging our senior leaders with what's going on the ground is key. So that kind of listening and taking it up through the organisation. The challenge for me is to position it as an opportunity to explore rather than a moan. I think that positioning is really, really key, actually. And also, just going back to Matthew made a good point earlier in the previous round of questions, which is around the biggest problem I have with my team is dealing with a lack of strategy from the top whilst trying to motivate my team. So Matthew's saying I can only offer help with short-term problems and urge patience, which is always a challenge. So I think as managers, we do encounter this kind of squeezed middle. We're reliant on support sometimes from the senior leadership and for them to listen as well. And that takes a lot of, those influencing skills, those stakeholder engagement, those dialing up. How do we communicate with our senior leaders in a way that's helpful for them? We've got some other stuff coming through as well. I think Jenny's put, I think on a video call, you have to make even more of an effort to show you're listening. Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Dilpazir, but I find myself being almost over animated on to make people know I'm listening.
I remember when COVID hit and everything became virtual, how exhausted I was at the end of each call, because like you said, you're just trying to articulate just visually what you might have done through body language and just in terms of your positioning in the room. I think it's really important to showcase that you are hearing and being heard.
Yeah. And Jill's put here about there are different challenges to managing hybrid teams than there are to managing entirely remote teams. And I completely agree. It is a different dynamic completely, isn't it? If you're working with a completely remote team versus some people that go into the office sometimes and sometimes are virtual. So yeah, we hear you there, Jill, and we completely agree. And Maggie also agrees as well.
Yeah, because what you get with people who are in office kind of have these moments to connect and share some knowledge. And if that's not then shared on a platform that other people can connect to, then what you end up having is a bit of information poverty, right? So people then are disconnected, are making decisions based upon not the whole information. And then you kind of have these different almost two cultures that you're trying to navigate in a hybrid context. Yeah. So you're having that level playing field and establishing that is really key.
Fantastic. I think we're going to shift on now. And what we were really keen to do is just create some space, which is always a gift nowadays, the gift of space and time, just to reflect on some of the things that we've shared today. And what are the one or two things that you think you're going to take away that could be useful for either for you or for your managers to share with your managers? So I'm going to set the timer for 60 seconds, which always feels like longer than it is, but let's do it. Just give you some time, and then it would be great if you could pop your thoughts in chat. You can send it to me directly if you want to be anonymous. Just take that space to have a reflect. Start to think about, what's the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference, and how can you go about building that into your muscle memory, into your habit systems. Got another 20 seconds left.
So Huda said that she's finding vision as the opposite of VUCA. That was very useful to her. She loved it. You're welcome, Huda. So Gemma's saying she's going to introduce microtransactions on a daily basis with more people.
Love it, Gemma. Love it.
Emma is saying that to the vision, communicate that and re-communicate it when it shifts. Great point, just to keep repeating the communication. Jenny says she agrees with the microtransactions. Matthew said make an effort to give more praise. It does take effort. It kind of, when you're annoyed at someone, it comes automatically, but when you're pleased, I think it takes presence of mind to articulate what. Emma, 100% microtransactions. Yeah, I think we're all missing that a little bit, aren't we? Kind of those water cooler moments.
Yeah. So we have a lot more 45-minute meetings in organisations than an hour. It's probably good for everyone.
Yeah. And also you could have a 1-hour meeting and give permission to spend 15 minutes of that just having those informal conversations. Permission to do so, I think, is really nice.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to move on, and if there's anything else still to say, we'll come back to it in a second. But just to share some closing thoughts, really, and how you can stay connected, or if you want to learn a little bit more. So the guide, the white paper, is available to download. The link's in here. We'll send out the link for you so you can download that from our website. You don't have to put any details in. You literally can click on it and download it, which is nice and easy and straightforward. We're going to be sharing the recording from today's session on YouTube. We'll make sure you get a link to that sent out to you. But you may also want to have a quick look on our YouTube channel, because a lot of our previous events are on there, or some of our thought leadership stuff. We've got some great sound bites on, dealing with change and how to look into the future. So take a look on there. There might be some stuff that's of use to you. One of the things you can do is subscribe to our newsletter. We run probably 2 or 3 events like this every term. So you can dial into those by getting our newsletter. We only send probably a newsletter a quarter, give or take. So you won't get over bombarded with things from the Oxford Group, but it is a good way to keep connected if you want to know what's going on. Please share any of this content, the guide itself, with your managers. We wrote this from a genuine place of trying to help managers in a really, really difficult space at the moment to come to terms with some of this stuff. So if you can share that onwards with your teams, we're always very grateful for that. And last but not least, we've got all of the usual social media places you can follow us. So LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, the 3 predominant channels that we're on. And if you do want to continue the conversation, then Dilpazir and my email address is at the bottom there. We're always interested to talk about this type of stuff. So, so yeah, please do get in touch if it's helpful. Anything else come through on chat? Let's have a quick look.
Just people saying thank you for
Okay.
the practical takeaways, which is really nice to hear. That was always the intention. So yeah, lots of appreciation. Thank yous.
Thank you for sharing the appreciation there. We're already moving forward on the managing hybrid teams in a virtual world. So all that leads us to do is say thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your engagement in the chat. It's been really useful to hear your thoughts as well. So we wish you all a good day. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.